Hey, I'm here with Peter Gregory from First Choice Business Brokers, and I have a question for him. Peter, what are the most common reasons that deals that you're working on don't end up going through? This is a deal that gets to due diligence, maybe, and then falls apart. What are some of the key reasons that happens?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think because First Choice, we're a very high touch company as it is. We don't carry too many listings. We carry very good quality, 10 to a dozen listings, any one of us, my agents and such, because we do a really good job. And I think that kind of partially answers why a deal doesn't happen. Again, with First Choice, I'm benefiting from 30 years of development of and insight as to how we work with companies so that it's really, I think I'm going to talk more about the preventative side is always working backwards from the end. And, people like you, Len, and me that are business brokers and First Choice is just about everybody has really great chops from their past history. They can see that and they're working as consultative salespeople, if you will, to the buyers. I call it building a buyer myself. I mean, I build a lot of buyers and it's great. I love developing that. And that's where if I had 150 listings, that's where a common reason is because we're not whoever's handling a deal isn't looking at the details and taking care of them along the way. If you're really advisory, as I am, and my agents and whatnot, you get in there and you see these things, and you build the seller, you build this buyer. You just along the lines of what you do for them, Len, is you assess them and you try to help them with the blind spots. I'll call it, blind spots and turning red flags into green lights is another way I say it. Is what's going on with their company that, in a previous conversation you and I had, you were talking about how an owner had a big competitor move in and they adapted. They moved quickly. They pivoted is a great word for that. They pivoted with that and became a specialty, high touch, smaller, concern rather than the big behemoth that had moved in. So it's lack of preparation. In fact, in business, we don't really deal with LOIs, letters of intent. To us, it's just a couple month delay, and then all these other new details come out when you go to an offer. So we work right immediately with an offer with the buyer and say, phrase it in this way. We coach them into it to put the things in there. And, it's interesting, but I coach buyers. I'll tell them, I can get things from the seller you're not even thinking about, perhaps, or you haven't said. And one example of that consistently is don't forget about insurance. One of the dark closets of a business is that you have to open once in a while. But, I'll have them start thinking about insurance early on. It's just an example that saves a lot of time in that they have to start thinking about what kind of coverage such a company would have. They'll talk to the seller about what they carry and whatever. But that's a good example is you learn what the pitfalls are and you don't want that to delay it. So when we get to the table for a closing, it's pretty well done. Even when we get to an offer, it's so defined by the time we get to an offer, it truly is. There's just the last few things that the seller will reveal that are very proprietary to it. That's what really happens in diligence is the company is giving up quite a bit of information about their business model at that point. So that's why we go under a contract and have a deposit and such. But I think I kind of explained how I avoid it. But things that blow up, I don't really have the seller's usually pretty committed and it's an extra job, and they get, let's call it excited but fatigued as well. And there's a point where it's like, okay, time to make suddenly things happen slowly and then suddenly where the terms are finally ironed out and let's just make a deal. We've seen that in the last 6 months, by the way, is there was a huge pent up, so if you will, sort of group of business buyers. And it all happened in the last 6 weeks. We're seeing, or 6 months rather, with the change of economic outlook and whatnot, it exploded and deals several a day from my, First Choice has 100 offices. So I see deals coming through every day, congratulatory emails about closes. So we all, in our company, we're very prepared. We're very thorough. Not being thorough ends up not considering something that could, take place at a closing. And so thoroughness is the antidote for deals going blowing up on you at the end.
Got it. Appreciate the insights. I think, really what it really comes down to is you guys been around the block and the buyers and sellers are both prepared and knowledgeable about the process. And that probably, keeps a lot of the failures from happening as you get it. Because it's a huge investment in time, right? For both the buyer and the seller to go through the due diligence process. And ultimately a shame when those don't happen when there's intent, right? And granted, I'm sure there are cases where something comes to light that nobody knew about, they're good reasons. But appreciate your take on what ultimately drives to successful transactions.
Yeah, thanks, Len. Always great. Love talking with you about business, our common sights here and what we deal with as far as the business owners go. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks.